Okay. Welcome back to the 2024 Virtual Residency Workshop. It's Monday, June 24th, and this is our final session for the day. This is Cyberinfrastructure User Support, presented by Ellen Fritz Waters. And before I start Ellen off, I just want to say the latest solicitation for very large, expensive supercomputers from the National Science Foundation just dropped. I just put the URL in the chat, only to say that again, it includes that paragraph about 95% uptime. So I wasn't lying. All right. So, Ellen, take it away.
All right. So I'm Ellen Fritzwaters. I'm an HPC research facilitator, part of the Research Infrastructure Services or RIS group at WashU here in St. Louis. Um, a little bit about myself here before I get into the talk. I have a bachelor's in animal science from Iowa State University. Is when I initially went to college. I was going to become a veterinarian. You can all see how that played out, that plan. Um, After that, I got my master's in animal breeding and genetics at Iowa State with an emphasis on bioinformatics. And then I worked at Iowa State for 7 years as an assistant scientist doing bioinformatics research, working with cyber infrastructure groups. TAC down at Texas is one group I worked with, as well as a few others. And then I moved and was a research scientist for about a year out at the University of Washington in Seattle. And then I took a bit of a break and did some traveling and lived in a couple of different countries, and came back and became an HPC research facilitator here at WashU as I realized that really what I wanted to do in terms of research was help people do their research and help people use high performance computing to do their research. So today I'm going to talk about the user support aspect, which is the main part of my job. So a little bit about the importance of user support. I'm going to use a term that we're using here at WashU in our group, kind of to throw around ideas and things of bridging the gap. So as part of the user support part of CI, your job is going to be bridging that gap. And that can take multiple forms and multiple formats as well. And one thing to remember as I go through everything and to keep in the back of your mind is that while we can put out everything from a user support side of things, we can do the reaching, we can do engaging. It also takes the users actively engaging back with us and wanting to reach out and bridge that gap as well. So keep that in mind as I go through everything. So the roles of user support, we have multiple different roles. The first is education that I have listed here for myself. I like to think of this as kind of one of the most important aspects of what our job is. We want users to be able to use our services as well as other services related to what we provide, and so we want to be able to educate them so that they can use those services. Consultation, oftentimes you'll have to engage with the user to consult in what they potentially need in terms of whether it's hardware, software, uh, maybe analysis or any combination of those. Problem solving, a lot of our skills are day to day happens to be involved with problem solving, questions that a user has, issues that a user has brought up, maybe something we've discovered ourselves. And then outreach, you have to reach out and talk to groups, talk to researchers, uh, give talks to students, any number of things in terms of research or in terms of outreach and getting in contact with researchers. And then it's user support is the most visible aspect of any CI team. We're there, we're the front door, we're on the front lines. You're the visible part that everyone sees, that everyone interacts with. And so we want to make sure we maintain that being visible in a proper proper way so that we can get people coming to our group and using our services so that we can continue to grow and continue to help push research. just a bit here about the importance on the user support. Uh, from a study that was done, it's said that improvements in user support, your documentation, the trainings we provide, anything we can automate if possible, the handling of requests, all of that results in an increase of allocation requests. So, the number of people wanting to use the service increases as you make improvements to user support. And this information comes from a study done by researchers at the University of Colorado Boulder in 2019. Some of the roles of user support, and it's a very adaptive role. You have to be able to adapt and change pace as you go. We have a wide range of responsibilities, and these can change day to day. One day you may be helping a user create a Docker container. The next day you might be teaching in a seminar for graduate students on how to use high performance computing. And it can even change minute to minute, depending on what you're involved with, what tickets have come in, and anything of that nature. So some of these responsibilities, what may they include? Kind of breaking it out a little bit further than what we did before. That's teaching, as I've stated before, to myself, this is probably the most important aspect of what we do, and it works its way into the other aspects of our responsibilities that we have. And at any point in time when you're doing one of those other aspects, if you have an opportunity to teach, it'll help make both the researcher job hopefully easier as well as your own easier. Troubleshooting, as I mentioned, we have to figure out what user might be having in terms of a problem, like what's causing it, where it's coming from. Troubleshooting for ourselves, helping our team of engineers on the back end of Cyberinfrastructure troubleshoot, upgrade or an update to something, or just implementing a new feature. We help troubleshoot there. Bridging communications. So we need to be able to bridge that communication between an engineer perhaps and a researcher, or maybe you're working with a group of researchers and they're collaborating together and there's a bit of miscommunication amongst the group, and so you need to bridge the communications there, and that's a part of the job. Outreach coordination, going to a faculty meeting or a group that the university's putting on where we could have a presence, reach out to those researchers, especially faculty, at least here at WashU. Faculty are the big component of getting access to our system, and so if we can reach out to them, we can hopefully get more people using our services and help expand that and help provide an avenue for better research in general. And then a conflict resolution specialist, it's the last one. Sometimes there's a bit of conflict, whether it's between a researcher and something happening with the group. Maybe you're working with a couple of researchers and you have to there's a little bit of conflict there, or just conflict of trying to get something working on the system and the system not behaving, any number of things. We're kind of that conflict resolution specialist as well. So once we move beyond our roles, a thing that can help in our roles as user support is having a classification of users, because this allows us to better address the needs and meet the needs of what researchers need, want, and are looking for in their expectations. And the user experience, like most things, is a spectrum. It's not, relegated to these, in this case, 3 categories here that I'm using. But it's, we do this as humans to better classify and better be able to handle any situation. So the classifications here that I'm going to use are beginner. And then in the parentheses here, I have introductory. That's, the level of the user's a beginner, but the material they need is introductory. So that's kind of the split here that I have going, what the user's classification is versus what they need in the parentheses. And then we have intermediate and the intermediary. And then we have the skilled users, and they need our advanced documentation or services, anything of that nature. To go across some of these topics here that I'm going to cover more in depth as I continue on with my talk, I'm not going to cover everything that I've listed here between our roles of user support and our classification of users. I'm going to hit on a couple some main points that I would like to cover today. Um, and some of the others will creep in as I discuss, the ones that I am going to talk about. So the first, I'm going to start with teaching and talk about teaching as an aspect of user support. And then I'm going to get in and break down the classifications of users and how we can relate that to teaching, and then bring that kind of back together with bridging communications, what we do to bridge communications and how that can be used, with our classifications of users and teaching and all that. And then we'll get into a few expectations that come from users. And then finally, I'll kind of go over, that bridging the gap uh, topic that I talked about, the whole idea behind it, and some examples, especially that we're using here at WashU to kind of try and bridge that gap of knowledge, communications, all the different areas that there might be a gap between the users and the research that they're trying to do. And then we'll kind of wrap everything up with a summary um, here. So teaching, we'll get into the teaching here. Uh, as I've stated, it's one of the most important roles, at least to myself. Other people may feel differently, but it's very important in what we do and how we can get users engaged in using our services. And this role is, the aspect is to provide researchers with the knowledge and the tools that they need to be able to do their research. And teaching comes in many forms. These can include, workshops, trainings, seminars that you put on, one-on-one consultations that you have involved with the user, doing guest lectures in a classroom for a class that faculty members putting on, uh, office hours, have a chance there. Not only are you doing troubleshooting there, but maybe you'd help do some teaching during that office hours. And as I mentioned, it extends into the other roles as well. So some of the challenges, that we face when doing teaching, I have them listed here. The first one is motivation. Why is it worth it to do teaching? And that motivation comes both from the user support aspect as well as the users aspect. Why is it worth it? What do we get out of it? What do they get out of it? And you kind of have to address that as you go. The format, what is the best delivery? How are you going to deliver the information that you need to get across? Is it simply through documentation? Are you providing videos? Are you going to have a seminar or a series of seminars that you're putting on? Do you have like a short course type of thing, or are you going to have a hackathon, anything like that? Then the effectiveness. What is the goal that you want to achieve? And what is the goal that the users want to get out of the teaching that you're doing? And then improvement. What could be better? So what can you do to improve upon how you're teaching, how you're going able to provide that knowledge to users, and anything on that front. So breaking these down a bit more, talking about motivation is an important role of teaching. We as user support need to be motivated to provide that knowledge. And then, as I mentioned, users need to be motivated to seek out that knowledge and engage in the opportunities for learning. And anything we can do to help increase that engagement, helps us out as well. So some of our motivators to do the teaching, there's reduce of support needed. A more knowledgeable user is better able to use your system, is less likely to encounter potential issues. The more knowledgeable they become, they are also potentially better able to troubleshoot an issue that they come across. If their job's not running, they can figure out why. All that fulfillment. First, some of us, like myself, I enjoy teaching others. I enjoy helping engage others in doing their research and getting them doing their research and seeing the outcome of that. As I mentioned in my About Me, I've done research before. I was a research scientist for a while, and I like doing research and engaging in it, but I've also, throughout that time, figured out that I enjoy helping others engage in research more than I necessarily enjoy doing research directly myself. And so that's a big, motivator for myself is to, get fulfillment out of that of helping others do this amazing research. And hopefully when you have a relationship with the researchers or with your university as a facilitator and user support, that you get to see the outcome of those the research, whether you get to see that an article was published in Nature or another big journal of research that was done at your university where they used your services and were able to do their research and get it accomplished. And so that's great. And that helps, build relationships between you and the researchers that help facilitate communication, all of that. Some of the motivators that users have when they're, seeking out that knowledge is a barrier removal. So maybe there's a barrier that they just lack the knowledge of, and so they're seeking out information on how to be able to, get past that barrier so that they can better do their research. One of the big ones here for us at WashU happens to be Docker. Our system uses Docker and container technology, and so a lot of users find that as a barrier. So anything we can do to try and help remove that barrier, get them used to Docker and containers, get them knowledgeable about them, about containers, hopefully building their own containers, or at least knowledgeable enough that they could build their own container if they need to. So that would help build, remove barriers there. And then self-sufficiency. A lot of users want to be able to do their tasks themselves so that they know they're in control of it, they know what's going on, and they understand it, and so that being self-sufficient is a big motivation there. Moving on, we talk about teaching formats. I mentioned there's multiple formats that we can engage in. We can see, a lot of formats that are out there and that we can use, and there's pros and cons to all of them. And a big thing to note is that there's no single way that works for all of those teaching or all of those who are doing the learning. Not, some topics include multiple of the formats that I'll discuss here in just a moment. You can see listed there. And so we have to figure out a way to engage and use those formats to most effectively get our teaching across and get that knowledge into play, into the users' hands and into their heads so that they can hopefully make use of it in doing the research. Documentation is a big one. Permanent documentation. It's adaptable, it's accessible, it's persistent, it's always there. Most groups, from my experience, have online documentation, both internal and external. They have the user-facing documentation to help the users and get the knowledge to them, and then they have the internal documentation to help you be able to do your job as facilitator, as user support, to help engage those users and answer their questions, get the job running, all of that. Then there's workshops and training, both digital and in person. And these are, a great tool to use, especially if you have topics that are kind of more in depth, that maybe documentation isn't going to be able to hit all the aspects or answer all the questions that a user might have. So you can use workshops and training to try and get that information across. And then there's, multimedia methods, hybrids, videos, published presentations. In terms of giving a seminar or a series of workshops, you have the workshop that you're giving, but then you record that workshop. And so then you can post the video later, but you also are using something like Git and GitHub to host any of the potential data or examples that you use in the seminar that you want to give as well. And so that all becomes kind of persistent there. And while it's not direct documentation, it's related to it, and it's related to the seminars that allow the users to be able to access that anytime in case they need to go back and watch the video again, any of those types of things. And so when we talk about teaching, talk about the effectiveness. How effective are we in getting that information across? Are the user's expectations and understandings being met? What the user wanted to get out of the teaching, what they got out of it, or did something happen along the way? A lot of this, questions we can ask in regards to, are we, meeting that expectation was there clear communication? are we able to get the communication across of the information in a way that is understandable to users? Because as I mentioned before, there's multiple classifications for users. You have your beginners and your advanced, and maybe something you have documented is written in such a way that the advanced users, it makes sense to them, but a beginner user has, comes in and it doesn't make any sense to them because they don't have the experience or the understanding necessarily to engage in that documentation in a way that an advanced user can. And so if you can, make that wording less ambiguous to a beginner, but still maintain the information necessary for advanced user, you can have that clear communication across the board. Um, Another question is, why do the users wish to engage? That helps, and making sure we meet that understanding that they want, that those expectations. What are they looking to get out of this? Are they, attending a Docker based seminar where you're teaching users how to create their own Docker image, expand Docker images, and you know, kind of get down into the nitty gritty of what makes up a container. But the user's just looking at how do they use containers on your system. Um, that might be, their expectations weren't met, but maybe you can direct them to another avenue of how they can get that, the understanding that they're trying to find. And another thing you have to ask is, what knowledge do these users already have? And that's another reason that we use the classifications that we do here at WashU is we can, if it's a more beginner oriented documentation, so something that's introductory, we can write it with the idea in mind that these users don't have a lot of information on this topic or maybe on HPC at all. And so we can kind of build them up and get them moving forward from there. And then in general, what are the users looking to get out of it? As my example I provided before, maybe they're not looking to get out of the what you're trying to teach versus what you're actually trying to relay to users. And so you can direct them better, hopefully, to engage them better. And then another, effectiveness is, are the users understanding the material? Are they actually understanding what you're presenting? Is there a good way to gauge this? Is there engagement? Are the users actively engaging in what you do? If you have examples, are they following along? Are they doing the examples themselves? Was the pacing adequate? Are you pausing to stop and ask for those questions? See if there's which leads into user feedback. Are you pausing along the way to see if there's feedback from users so that while you're giving the presentation, you can maybe adapt to what they're what they need? Or at the end of the seminar or the series, you provide a form that they can fill out and provide feedback that you can go back through at your leisure and parse through and see maybe what you did right, what you did wrong, what users were expecting, anything like that. And then again, a check for understanding. This goes back to the engagement and the pacing. Pause for those questions and engage the users, see if they're understanding. And then finally, was there a time allowed for questions? You always want to make sure that there's time for questions, even if you have occasionally get nothing but crickets in response. You still want to take a moment and see if there's questions to engage in understanding. So how do you tackle various levels of expectation levels within live workshops? So that's kind of what I was talking about at how we're aiming our documentation and our seminars that we give at the different levels. From the very beginning, we kind of want to make a point to the users and try to hopefully get them to understand that this is the level of of what we're shooting for in this seminar that we're giving to help hopefully keep those expectations within the realms of what we're trying to offer for those workshops. If users are asking questions that go beyond what you're doing for the workshop, something you can do is if you have those seminars or the documentation that's aimed towards the level that they're engaging with. You might be able to, depending on how much of a difference there is between the level of what you're giving versus the level at which they want to engage, maybe you can kind of sidetrack just a little bit into that to make sure that there is that understanding and that they are getting that covered. If not, mention, we have seminars that we provide that are going to go over this topic in more depth, or we have documentation on this. You can start there. In the future, we could create a seminar or provide a seminar to help go over what you're, doing. But the questions are always, a very important aspect, at least for myself, stopping, making sure there's understanding, pausing to deal with those different levels of expectation that might exist so that when you get to the end, hopefully as many people as you can potentially, you know, get to have been satisfied with their expectations and understanding, because you're never going to, please everyone 100% of the time. And then improvement in teaching, there's always room for improvement in anything we can do. And especially with teaching, at least from my experience and from what I've taught and experienced as a user and getting understanding. And there are some important tools that can be used to aid in this improvement in what we do. Self-assessment, so, going over your documentation that you have on the yourself, going back to it, looking at it, see if it can still make sense with where maybe your group has evolved to or grown to, or if you have new systems or have incorporated something new, going back, make sure that documentation is in line with what you have, as well as maybe providing, your colleagues in cyber infrastructure, your other user support people, as well as some of the engineers, going over your talk with them and seeing if they have feedback to provide, which leads into the feedback in general. The user feedback, the questions along the way, the forms at the end, the polls at the end that you can ask of the users to get. And then finally, the peer review, which is kind of a self-assessment of reaching out to colleagues and getting, a review, their ideas on your documentation or their ideas on a talk you want to give, any number of that. So some of the skills that are associated with when it comes to teaching is communication. You need to be able to communicate as effectively as you can and talk so that everyone can hopefully understand, break things down if you need to. There's the whole phrase, explain it to me like I'm five. A lot of times users need it broken down at a level that's beyond what maybe you have communicated in the past or what you were communicating. It's just something to keep in mind. Then listening, engaging and listening to the users, the questions that are being asked, or just outside of, a seminar, just listening to what users provide as feedback. Are they able to find the information in your documentation? Or do you see, a lot of questions coming up the same through your ticket system, whatever you use to engage with the customers, your users? Do they have a lot of the same questions? Maybe you can highlight that better in your documentation. Collaboration, working with others, working with faculty, getting into a classroom and giving a guest lecture for that classroom when it comes to either using your services or engaging in high performance computing. Adaptability, you need to be able to adapt and change what you're doing when it comes to teaching, because maybe what you've been doing in the past has worked in the past, but now you find that it's no longer working because there's a different cohort of students coming into the university or coming in for degrees that advanced degrees that are doing research that don't have the same experience that they did before, and so you need to adapt to engage with that. Some examples of types of topics and sessions taught for various levels. I'll kind of get into that a little bit later in the when I go over the bridging the gap towards the end, after we've kind of covered everything and getting a foundation laid. kind of go over some examples of types of topics and set sessions and how we break them out. So engagement, again, big component of teaching is you need to engage, you need to have that active engagement, ask those questions that I've stated multiple times. You want uh, it's a great way to keep engagement going if you have, people asking questions. Empathy is important when it comes to teaching. You need to kind of understand where your users are coming from, maybe have empathy for, their frustrations that they might have. They're trying to do and follow along what you have in documentation, but they just can't seem to understand or get it to work. Having empathy for why they're frustrated and knowing that they don't necessarily aren't angry at you can help, better engage in teaching. And then just having patience. Not everybody learns at the same level. Not everybody learns in the same way. And so you may have to go over something or reiterate something in a new way, change up how you stated it. That can be a huge factor in reaching that understanding and getting the teaching across is just rephrasing something. Maybe they're just not understanding the way you've decided to phrase it. So if you have patience, you can understand where that's coming from. You can try and rephrase it, and hopefully they get that understanding across. So now that we've talked about teaching, I'll get into the different classifications of users and kind of some expectations from them, what they mean to being a user support facilitator and all of that. We'll begin with the beginner here. So some characteristics of beginners. Henry hit upon it earlier in one of his talks about where the users are coming from, what the experience they have, and that's why I have the cell phone here is the image. There's a lot of users, especially beginners anymore, their interaction with computers is the cell phone, it's the tablet. They haven't necessarily had that full computer interaction anymore. They might not have that, especially depending on, where they got their education before even coming to college. Some schools have full laptops for the students. Some schools only have an iPad, and so the interaction with technology is varying. And but most often than not, a lot of people's interaction with technology is their cell phone, and so they have little or no experience with the command line coming in. A beginner user might have some knowledge of statistics software, maybe for in their graduate classes or an undergraduate class, they had to use R or MATLAB or something similar to do, some analysis for their class. They have limited knowledge of other types of programming, or they may have never used Python or Perl or anything like that. They have little to no experience with parallelization, which has been mentioned before, the ability to run multiple tasks simultaneously at the exact same time. And that's a big component of high performance computing, is engaging in the ability to have your software do that. And so they have no experience with that. And so you have to keep that in mind. They have little to no experience with job schedulers or schedulers. Most HPC systems are based in Linux and run via a job scheduler, which is a system that engages with commands that the user inputs and schedules, their software commands to run on the resources that the system has, and it handles, where that job gets scheduled. Is it able to be scheduled? What if you have multiple, queues in your system? Which queue it goes to, any number of things. And sometimes you might be using with you have beginner users who are coming into their graduate student experience, and they're being told to do their analysis on your system, and they have little to no experience with research in general either. And so you have to, keep that in mind and help, bridge that gap in their understanding there potentially, if they're not getting that experience or understanding outside of what they're doing with, with the services you provide. Some common issues that come up for beginners is the compute setup. trying to set up their own computer to even, be able to do things locally. So trying to install software locally. A lot of software, is either, point and click, you double click the install thing, it does everything, runs through everything automatically, you drag and drop it, and it goes through the process automatically. A lot there can be times with beginner users, have issues with just those types of tasks. Login procedures, the different login procedures that you have for getting access to your system. This is the big one. SSH, so the shell client login via the command line may seem very foreign to a lot of your beginner users, and so they don't know how to engage with that. You have to keep that in mind, and that may be the viewpoint they're coming from. Finding software, maybe the beginning user doesn't know where to find the software that they need or find the appropriate software. Um, uh, and then that kind of, helping them find software kind of gets into the getting help and documentation in general. Maybe they don't know where your documentation is, or they're having troubles navigating your documentation. They don't necessarily know where your ticketing system is for getting help, or they don't. The ticketing system itself seems a daunting task for them, maybe. Um, yeah, another thing that brought up here in the chat is just what kind of computers are they using? Are they using Windows, Macs? Are they maybe using Linux, Ubuntu, all that? Another good point just brought up that someone in a genetics class, the undergrads there, they don't know what a file is. So that's another thing when it comes to beginning users. They're not they see the icon, they double click on it, but they don't know that's called a file, or they don't know, what constitutes a file. And so when you start talking HPC systems and the fact that they can't visually see what represent those files, because a lot of times most computers anymore, or even your phone or your uh, a tablet, they have on them, it's a file. So like PowerPoint files, maybe you have a few PowerPoints on your desktop, and the image that represents those files is the first, page of your PowerPoint presentation. And so you can see that. Whereas, excuse me, where your system doesn't necessarily have quite that level of visualization of the files, especially when you get into the command line. And so that seems foreign. They don't really understand what they're looking at. So those are all common issues that you're going to run into with your beginner users. And then what are some beginners needs that are out there? So those might be different or related to the issues. Let's see. Yes, that good comment. There's that kind of hits upon the teaching topic of what do the users want to get out of it? Are they engaging with it? Do they want to be there? Um, any sort of that. So yeah, that's something you have to keep in mind, especially for the beginning users, is the engagement is a huge component of keeping them engaged, wanting to be there, wanting to understand all of that. And so some of the beginner needs that we go over: orientation and training. Clearly, they're beginner users. They need that knowledge base. They need to help develop that knowledge base that they need to do their research to help engage with your system and the services you provide. Lists, they need lists, uh, they need lists of tasks to accomplish. What do they need to do? They need text editors. They might not understand, we've had a couple examples in there of not understanding, what a file is and something like that. They might not understand that Word is technically a text editor software. And so when you say text editor, they don't know what you're talking about. They don't, as I've said before, software, they need to access the software. They don't know how. Um, uh, New software that's not previously used. Sometimes they're coming in fresh user to your system, and they need to use a software that no one on your system used before. And so now we have to engage with that. and get that moving. Movement of data, they need to move their data to be able to process it or to be able to store it. They don't know necessarily how to do that, so you have to engage with them on that. And knowledge of job systems, job submission in general. Like as I mentioned, it can be a foreign concept to the beginning user, but it's a need they have to be able to, process their analysis, get their code running that someone's given them, any number of things. So we go back to the teaching aspect when it comes to beginner. How do we kind of teach towards the beginner? We provide orientation and beginner level instruction. As I said, here at WashU, we have what we call our introductory courses and our introductory documentation. In order to help teach them, you need to maintain an up-to-date documentation, provide links, a lot of links to them, to users, beginning users, to help them find the information they're looking for or other sources of the information. And these links can be either to your own documentation or, outside documentation. Maybe you help you piggyback off another university's documentation they've already done that covers the topic really well, and so you don't want to, reinvent the wheel, and you provide that link to them. And then again, build trust as final one. When it comes to teaching beginners, you want to especially make them feel better about asking the questions that they have. You don't want them, there is no stupid question type of situation. Maybe they're embarrassed to ask the question. And so if you help build that trust, they won't be embarrassed to ask the questions that they need to ask. Explain things simply. The more simple you can explain something, the better understanding will be, relayed to the user, especially when they're a beginner. And then make sure you're thorough. So if they're a beginning user, you probably might have to be more thorough in your explanation than, say, an intermediary or an advanced user. Um, make sure to cover that knowledge gap that they would have. So now I'm going to kind of move on to the intermediate user. Here, characteristics of an intermediate user. They oftentimes have prior command line experience, maybe not a lot, but some. They have a varying experience with different languages. Maybe they've done a little bit of Python coding, or they've used R and SAS before, and they've done, more in-depth analysis in those. And so it's a little bit easier for them to adapt what they've done there over to what they need to do to use your system or other HPC services in general. They have some knowledge maybe of workflows. Maybe it's not complex. Maybe they're not using something like Nextflow or SnakeMate, but they have the knowledge of a workflow that they need to, complete this step and then move on to this step and then move on to this next step. They will notice and report potential problems. Your intermediate user is the most likely group to notice and report potential problems. And I'll kind of get into that in a little bit more when I talk about advanced users and why they might not report a problem. And they have abilities to, use searches and do troubleshooting. A huge thing when it comes to troubleshooting that I like to, kind of emphasize and help people out is, and I use it myself in a lot of what I do when it comes to engaging a user, trying to figure out what's going wrong with their system, or maybe what's happening with our own system, is Google, or as I refer to it, your Google foo. If your Google foo is strong, you're going to be great at troubleshooting. So your intermediate users are probably going to be a lot better at understanding how to use Google searches or just searches in general and how to do the troubleshooting. Some of the common issues that come up with your intermediate users, or just common issues because of intermediate users, they are probably the largest portion of your users that you'll have when it comes to HPC. They're the first to notice and report problems because they're far more likely to encounter, have something happen and come to your service desk or your ticketing system and report it before they delve too deep into troubleshooting themselves. If some simple troubleshooting tasks don't resolve it, they'll come report the problem. They have a mix of questions, both simple and complex, and maybe the question goes from simple to more complex. They ask a simple question of why is my software not running on the system? And while it seems simple at first, maybe maybe you think there's a mistake in how they submitted the job, but then you get delving into it, and the question is actually more complex than that, as this software requires X and your system's not providing X, or in a lot of times in the case of what we encounter, since we do use Docker and it's required to run jobs, the Docker container doesn't have X installed. And so we have to, work with them to get that installed in their container, or get a container that has it installed and sort of that. They're aware of the standard help channel, so they'll, come through your service desk and your ticketing system. Uh, they may have their own way of doing things because they are intermediate, they're more knowledgeable. And so that could, uh, happen to engage in kind of the conflict resolution part of the job, because you have to be able to resolve that conflict if they have their own way of doing things, but they can't do it that way on your system. And they may not like how your system works or the policies you have in place in regards to your system. And so you have to engage with that and help manage those expectations as well. Some of the needs of intermediate users, they often require more specific training. Um, they're looking for effective solutions, not just a solution, but something that's effective. They want better performance and efficiency, or they need better performance and efficiency. Sometimes you can help with that. Sometimes it's, that's relegated to the software they decided to use, but maybe you can point that out to them, help them figure out a different software to use. They oftentimes need specific versions of software. And that can become problematic as you try to manage, as a cyber infrastructure group, how to the how to keep those different versions of software available to all of your users, but also maintain a functioning system. They oftentimes need a higher level of control of either their job or the system itself. And then uh, they're not necessarily looking for root access. That's probably more your advanced users that are going to ask for that, but they still want kind of a higher level of control. And then they have setups that may conflict with your system specs. They oftentimes will need code support. Maybe they're engaged in developing code, or they work for a group that's developed code and they need that support to get it working on your system. Sometimes they ask to get it working in general, and depending on your specific group providing HPC services, maybe that's something you provide, or maybe it's something you don't, but they're going to need that. So when it comes to teaching, um, again, the biggest aspect when it comes to the intermediate user is build that mutual trust. You want them to trust you, and you need to kind of have that trust of that what they're going for. They know kind of what they need. They need those more advanced classes. You need to provide those classes, provide classes on, even though it's something they may understand, maybe they don't understand the full complexities of troubleshooting or using, maybe they want a class on Python or more advanced packages within Python. And so you work to engage in that. They need one-on-one meetings more so necessarily than a beginning user. They need additional information added to your documentation sometimes, to be able to get to satisfy what they're looking for out of your documentation. They need, when it comes to teaching them, they need data and evidence more so than a beginner. Beginner's new to it, they don't have an understanding, so they're seeking out that understanding, and they don't necessarily need that example, that evidence of we do it this way for this reason. This works better than the way you're trying to do it, or this works better than other ways we found, type of thing. Whereas an intermediate user is going to want that evidence, want that available. They're going to want transparency. I mean, you should always try to be as transparent as you can when you're teaching or engaging in users, but intermediate users are going to want it more so than a beginning user. And then when it comes to dealing with intermediate users and teaching and engaging in their learning, encourage them, contact vendor support or user forums. So maybe they're looking for information about a particular software. So you that's developed by someone at a different university or by um, a business somewhere, and so encourage them to contact them or reach out to them, or at least act as the bridge to get them in contact with them and user forums. So maybe there's questions they ask that are pertaining to the software they have, and so for my bioinformatics background, I know of Seek Answers is out there as a great resource available for people trying to do sequencing type work, and so maybe you point them to using Seek Answers to engage with to get the answers to the questions they have. And so uh, now we move on to our final category of users, the advanced user. Characteristics of an advanced user: they can be faculty, research staff, or advanced students. Just because they're advanced doesn't mean that they're going to be faculty. They might be a student who came in with the knowledge that was learning outside, of the classroom, or maybe they're like myself when I went to get my master's. Like I mentioned, it's in animal breeding and genetics, but it has an emphasis on bioinformatics. Maybe you're the undergrad in animal science looking to go become a veterinarian, but while you're an undergrad, you built your own computer. Not usually something somebody does when they're in the biological sciences as an undergrad like that. And so they have, they can be advanced and advanced users can come from anywhere. But they oftentimes will have experience and access to multiple HPC systems. I myself, in the course of my research, have used well over 6 kind of major HPC systems. I've used TAC, have experience that exceed our own system here at WashU and RIS. I've used POSI supercomputing in Australia and all of that. So, your advanced user is going to have that experience or maybe even access to multiple systems. They are proficient in scripting or programming languages. Maybe they're using C++ or Fortran, any number of software, and they're developing their own scripts. They're programming their own things to get their analysis done. They're developing and using parallel applications. They know what parallel is, and they're maybe using it more so than your intermediate users. They often know or are using GPUs. They want to make use of those GPU services that you have and the resources you provide there. They have complex workflows and scripts. They know what Nextflow is. They're trying to use Nextflow on your system. They want to use SnakeMake on your system. They want to automate as much as they can so that once they get their analysis running, they can, doing the stuff that they want it to do, they can go do other things type of situation. And they're willing to try new things. And this is a characteristic that can be both, kind of a good thing and a bad thing, depending on what it brings about or how you look at it. They're willing to try that new thing, to troubleshoot it themselves, figure out the solution. So some common issues that come up, or that you'll encounter when engaging with an advanced user, they're probably only a small fraction of support requests. They're very self-sufficient. They have the information to troubleshoot themselves. They use complex software and tools. Oftentimes, if this is the case, they're too advanced to act as the local expert. So you have a lab group. Oftentimes, advanced user won't be teaching the new users coming into that lab group necessarily, unless they've been told to, because they see themselves as too advanced maybe to do that. And so that could be an issue that you have to deal with. They might, they're be great at bug identification and hardware, third-party applications or libraries, potential things that, hardware beyond, you're going to want to make sure that you figure out a solution to that for your services so that they can continue to provide. You work with your engineers, your group as a whole to try and figure that out. But like third-party applications or libraries, oftentimes there's not a lot you as the facilitator can do about that. They're going to have to engage with, the people who created those applications or libraries directly in order to get them to run, or maybe you have to engage with them to figure out why that bug is presenting itself. Um, they're going to, as I mentioned, they're going to try to troubleshoot themselves, and they're going to use your support, so your ticketing system or whatever, as a last resort. Um, and another thing is their contact can often bypass the ticketing system. They don't think they might think they don't necessarily need to use that, so they email you directly. Um, and so you have to be able, understand to engage with that and handle that expectation there. Um, however, your, group does that, maybe you politely nudge them towards the ticketing system, or you just engage with the email yourself. But it's something you're going to have to deal with when it comes to advanced users. And then the needs of an advanced user, uh, I have here VIP treatment, whether they expect it or they need it. That's something you're going to have to deal with when it comes to advanced users. But maybe their particular need is unique in a one-off type of situation where they're going to need um, uh, that solution that nobody else is going to ever use type of thing. Um, they need direct and open communication avenues, whether that's your ticketing system or announcements that you put out about your systems. They oftentimes they'll want or need acknowledgement of their level of knowledge. That can be both good and bad. Of hey, you're the expert in the software. What do you think potentially is going on to help? You could ask them that type of thing to help you engage better in figuring it out yourself. But also they might ignore what you say because they have that level of knowledge that they think they know more than you maybe, and you have to deal with that. They're not engage with that, meet that expectation, all that. They might need high level and direct vendor and developer support because what they're doing is very complex. They're getting down into the nitty gritty of things, and um, need that solution that's going above and beyond potentially. They're going to have exceptions and violations or of the existing policies. Maybe they don't think the policy should apply to them, or what they're trying to do, it needs an exception to the policy, a one-time exception that your group is willing to make to get things done. But as user support, you need to be aware of that and managing if they come with questions or problems. And they might be asking for root access. And as I mentioned before, uh, Henry hit upon that's never going to happen. No user is ever going to be allowed root access. Oftentimes, depending on your CI group, you might not even have root access yourself. So the user is definitely never going to have root access. So when it comes to teaching towards advanced users, again, mutual trust. That mutual trust is important. Probably a lot of more one-on-one meetings. Again, just like your intermediate users. A good thing to do is learn about their research. Something we do here at WashU is we call them our Friday Tech Talks. Either we're presenting, maybe someone from our group's presenting something on a topic that's that they have developed where they were engaging with a user that we're now providing, or we have researchers come in and present what they're doing and how they're using our system so that we have a better understanding of what they're doing. And a lot of these tech talks happen to be the more advanced or high use users. Don't ever tell an advanced user that something is impossible. You might get away with that with a beginner, or maybe some intermediate users, but an advanced user is going to find a way to do it if you tell them it's impossible. You might have to when working with them, you might have to make small exceptions that don't impact other users. Obviously, you can't give them full access to use an MPI application that takes up 50% or more of your system. You're not going to want to do that. But if they have small exceptions to the rules or the policies you have in place, maybe they can get away with that. You want to be very transparent with an advanced user when you're interacting with them. Acknowledge, the issue, if there was an issue, what caused it, uh, that sort of thing. And then again, encourage the contact of vendor support or user forums if they have those third-party applications that they're having finding a bug in something that's not something you provide. That's the software from third-party type of thing. Encourage them to go and engage with them, um, and hopefully create that bug so that other users aren't going to encounter it then as well. So now that we've went over teaching and we went over the different users here, we got I'm going to go over bridging communications. So what does that read? Researchers and CI professionals often have varying nomenclature and ways of thinking that can lead to ambiguity and confusion, frustration when we're trying to teach, engage with the user, help them with their problems. And so we need to be able to bridge that, find what those communications issues are, and get that information to them. And a lot of times this communication gap can be further complicated by diversity of the researchers. So like the background, cultural differences, and this can include things like language barriers. And you're going to have to engage with that, understand that those exist, understand that you're going to have to get over those barriers or do your best to get past that barrier as you can. Some examples when it comes to this, acronyms are a big one. So SSD, a CI professional, you might be talking about SSD. You have your solid state hard drive or a hard drive. That's what you're referring to. But a researcher who's doing research and especially like speech therapy type of research, they might know it as speech sound disorders. And so they're sitting there confused as to why are you talking about having these speech disorders on my server that I'm wanting to buy. So acronyms, you have to watch out for them. Technical terms, very similar to acronyms. You have to watch out for them when you're engaging in a user. Singularity is one. It's for a CI professional, it's a container platform common in HPC settings. You have Docker and you have Singularity are the big ones. And so when you're talking about Singularity, that's what you're referring to. But a researcher might not, understand that's what you're referring to. To them, maybe they're, in, uh, you know, the study of some form of space. And so to them, a singularity is a point of infinite density and gravity within which no object inside can ever escape. So they're trying to figure out how your system relates to that, and they can be not going to understand that. And so how do we, when it comes to these bridging communications, you have background and cultural differences. You always want to be mindful of those backgrounds or cultures that the users where they work, as they work with, as they oftentimes won't necessarily keep them in mind when engaging in you, but with you, whether it's through the teaching, learning, ticket support, troubleshooting, any of that. Some important things to remember here. Not all research disciplines are as open as others in sharing ideas. So maybe one group, one discipline, you can ask them for their code in order to try and troubleshoot why it's not running on your system, but maybe another discipline, they're not willing to share that with you. Personalities can differ. We're all different people. You have to take that into account. You have to take into account primary and secondary languages. Maybe you're speaking in somebody's second or third language that they've learned. And so when you're engaging with them, you want to make sure that to keep that in mind, to help hopefully better bridge that gap of communication. Cultural backgrounds can impede communication. Depending on where they come from in the world, we all come from, different places, even within our own country or state, city, different universities have different methods of learning and teaching. All of that can impede communication. And so if you keep that in mind, try and address that when you encounter that. It makes it easier to bridge that communication gap that you may, experience. And again, as I mentioned, users may not keep these things in mind when they're engaging with you. And so as user support, as that facilitator, you're going to want to do your best to keep that in mind. If you need to, take a step back from it, look at it from a different perspective if you have to, in terms of what, if you're trying to figure out why a group of users isn't getting understanding from your teaching, or why the user can't follow along what you're trying to guide them through when it comes to answering or troubleshooting a problem that they have. So some of the skill sets that aid in this bridging of communication: attention to detail is huge. Adaptability, you have to be able to adapt, as I've mentioned before. Changing how you phrase something can have a huge impact on understanding. Um, Giving, an allegory or an example. Curiosity, be curious. Why isn't the user understanding this? Engage, ask those questions. Motivation, remember why you're doing this, what you're trying to get out of this, what the users wants out of this, why they're engaging. Your writing and being able to write to a more general audience, or in a way that uh, as many people as possible can understand, is um, huge. And that kind of, leads its way into effective communication in general. Uh, you know, Being open to build that skill set to be a more effective communicator, and all of that, taking classes if you need to. Maybe you take a class on teaching, if it's offered type thing. All those things are things that we need to keep in mind when we're user support and facilitating. So some of the methods that can help in better communications: reducing jargons, acronyms, the technical terms, as I've mentioned before. When we went over, the acronyms and the terminology, reduce that as much as you can. Try not to use them. Using analogies, as I mentioned, it helps people to, link it to a different aspect and gaining understanding. Do that check for understanding, ask those questions, ask if there are questions. Um, Engage in active listening. I'm sure we've all heard and understand, what active listening is. Make sure you engage in that when you're working with these users. They're not just, text on a computer. They're when it's coming through your ticketing system, they're an actual, person out there. Make sure you're engaging in that. Use paraphrasing if possible. It might help with understanding. Ask clarifying questions yourself instead of, not just asking for understanding, asking questions. Ask clarifying questions. And a lot of times people kind of, when they try to do engage with clarifying questions, they ask in a form that's, a yes or no. And you want to try and avoid that, because if you ask for a yes or no question, oftentimes you'll get people saying yes just to not feel awkward when they actually aren't understanding. So you want to avoid yes or no questions when you're doing the clarifying questions. I'm going to kind of go through this last bit maybe a little bit quickly, as I realize I'm running a little short on time here. So expectations, what expectations do users have? So from faculty, a lot of times, they want to, they want to do it their way. They have a method that they've been doing this analysis or been running this program. And so they want to be able to do it their way. And of all of these, none of them are necessarily good or bad. They're just expectations that you're going to have to engage with as user support, and stuff. Another thing is I need X. Why doesn't this, system support X? You don't have to engage with that. Maybe they'll expect you to teach their students this stuff for a variety of reasons. They have, there's the mindset of my time is important, and everybody's time is important. But it's depending on, how far down that faculty track they are, then that might be more of a mindset that you're going to have to be aware of when you're engaging with them. Then some expectations when it comes to students. Maybe they want you to help me write my code, depending on your policies. That's not something at RIS here at WashU, that's not something we'll necessarily do. We're not going to help you write your code. We will help you get it running on our system, but we're not going to help you write it. It's too hard to use their system. They're going to, students especially are coming from that cell phone level of understanding. So they're going to, expectation that the system's going to be easier than it is. Can you help me write my homework? Um, Luckily here at WashU, we haven't, encountered that one, I think, too much ever to, at least to my knowledge, but that may be something that comes up. The question of why do I have to use command line, that students might not their expectations are different to what the reality is when it comes to using an HPC system, especially if they have no prior, engagement with an HPC system. So now we're going to kind of get into bridging the gap here in the last little bit of we have these expectations of users. We have, what we provide and how do we bridge those gaps. So the first thing we need to do, when you want to bridge a gap is you need to identify that the gap exists, what gap exists. There can be gaps between user expectations and the cyber infrastructure offerings. There can be gaps between user assumptions and the user's actual needs. There can be gaps between user education versus CI offered trainings, gaps between user education and university level trainings, what the university provides, and gaps between the CI offered trainings and university trainings. And so for a couple of these, so user assumptions, example that I had was a user was engaging with and running their job using some of our GPU resources and looking when I was engaging into what the issue was that they were having, I realized that they their software that they were using didn't engage with the GPU ever. Wasn't written to engage with the GPU. So I had to engage with them, asked them why they were engaging the GPU, and they had the assumption that just engaging the GPU would make their code run faster. Just by default without having written it for, using a GPU or any of that. So their assumption was if I engage the GPU, my code runs faster, but their actual need was I don't need the GPU. I don't need to include it when I request a job, when I submit my job. And then let's see. So how can we bridge these gaps? What can we as CI professionals do to reach out? To help bridge those gaps? What trainings are we providing? What does our documentation provide? Who can be engaged to help? Do we need to reach out to a third party in some form? Maybe we engage with a vendor directly. I know here at WashU we have our, we use NVIDIA GPUs in our system. We had NVIDIA come in and give in collaboration with us, give a series about using GPUs. What is the user responsible for? Because when we get back to the very beginning, when I said that the users need to reach out and engage as well in order to bridge that gap. So, you want to identify what the user's responsible for. How far do you go before the user has to reach the rest of the way? And then what tools can be used to bridge that gap, whether it's for teaching, whether it's, seminars, videos, third party services, what have you. And finally, what outside sources can be used? Do you have an expert, or can you find an expert in using PyTorch, which is a Python package for engaging with GPU calculations and using that to do analysis? Maybe you have someone engage with them and have them come in and give a session on that. So just some examples here, quick. I know I'm running short on time of the bridging the gap that we're kind of trying to do here at WashU. This is what I hit on before when I said I kind of go over that. We have seminar series that we're working to expand here, and we have here this introductory compute. We've been giving that seminar series for a couple of years now. The topics include using Open On Demand on our system. What is the command line? What is the shell? What is shell scripting? And then, finally, how do you engage with RIS services and our compute platform? And so then we're working to develop an intermediary compute seminar series and then advanced compute seminar series. And so, some of the topics included in our intermediary compute is, tool usage. What tools can you use? Get um, checkpointing if the software doesn't have it already, troubleshooting, what can you do to troubleshoot, um, getting more in depth in developing Docker containers or containers in general. And then we have our advanced compute, software programming, how can you use our system to help develop your software? How can you use GPUs, engage in the GPUs that resources that we provide? And so what this allows, a user to do when they come in is they can come in at any of these levels and take the full course, full example of the course. So maybe they're introductory, maybe they're coming in and they need intermediary topics. Um, but then within each category, they can also engage. Well, maybe I only need the third topic that's offered in this series for introductory compute, but I also want, topic 1 and 2 of the intermediary compute. So we kind of break things out and help so that the users can engage with it at multiple levels to better fit what they need to help engage and bridge those gaps. And so something we're working on introducing is a self-assessment for our users to run through um, to determine, where's the information they're looking for, what seminar series that should they potentially be looking at for the information they're using. So, do you know what GUI stands for? If not, you probably should work up to do our introductory compute. Do you know what CLI or command line stands for? No? Well, you probably should begin in our introductory compute. Do you know what HPC stands for? Those types of questions in it. The questions get more in depth and advanced as you go over, and they lead you to, oh, you need intermediary compute, or you're looking for advanced compute type of, situation. And then when it comes to engaging the users, as I mentioned very beginning, teaching to me is the most important aspect when it comes to the jobs we do as facilitators and user support. So when maybe a user submits a ticket or they have an out of space error, and you delve into it, and this is a common one that comes up that I've engaged with here at WashU of their home space is out of their home directory is out of space. And so when you're engaging with that user, don't just tell them your home directory is full, please delete or remove files from it. Engage with them and use that opportunity to teach. It looks like your home directory is full. You can use the following command to monitor, your usage in your home directory, and then you provide that command an example of their own home directory and how it's full. And you're like, as you can see, this shows that your home directory is full, and then you can use this following command to find out what things are using up that space. Then you provide the command from that, and then you kind of engage with it from that point of from this you can see X, Y, and Z are using up most of your space. You can do A, B, or C to free up space. Maybe provide them a common one for our system is people use Conda or R Studio, and they install packages, and it installs the packages directly to their home directory space, which isn't what we consider best practices for using our system. It's not necessarily against policy, but it's not what we consider best practices. And because they oftentimes fill up that home directory space when users do this. And so we have examples of how to use, their storage allocation to be able to install those different packages that they have. And so, we provide an example of doing that and links to that. Another example is maybe multiple tickets have been created over time on a topic, and it's the same or very similar question. So you need to stop, identify why that may be, why are they asking that, take steps to address the issue. Maybe the information's not in the documentation, maybe you can put it there. Maybe you need to create a video of this particular topic. Maybe you just need to increase the visibility of that. So those are ways that you can help bridge that gap of for users. Some other ideas here: certification, allow a certification process of some form, paid seminars, in-person week-long session hackathons, allow users to bring their questions, their issues, help them get things working. Working with providers can help with costs and bring in expertise. And especially for, pay type seminar, maybe you can offer it for free if you work with providers. Hybrid and in-person seminars, not just using Zoom, that a lot of us have gone to, especially when COVID hit and all that. But go maintain or go back to those hybrid type of offerings of in person and digital as well. So quick summary here: user support role is a role that encompasses a myriad of skill sets. It's very challenging, but can be a very rewarding role. There's no single solution for any question for anything we do. User expectations are the driving factor behind what we do. And again, teaching, at least to me, is one of the most important aspects that you have as user support. So thank you. Are there any questions that we haven't already addressed? Let's see. Um, is that the question about PyTorch and the GPU detector, is that related to our system here at WashU, or is that a general question type of thing? All right. Um, I guess it depends on the system uh that you're using. They might have different methods to be able to determine that. I know for our system there we do have for some reason the detector doesn't work properly. Uh, uh, in some cases, and so we do have to, at least for us, acknowledge to our users that this detector doesn't work properly when engaging with our system, but here's other steps that you can engage with. Um, you know, to check and make sure that it's running or engaging with the GPU. But that's, again, very dependent on the system and how they've implemented things. Somebody was curious about documentation, applications, tools people are using. Um, that's a good question. We have our own documentation page that uses Sphinx here at WashU, and we use, GitHub repository to do access control. Uh, And that's an example here, but I guess using the Google Doc, maybe people can put in the Google Doc their what they use for their documentation tools and applications. If there's no other questions, I'll hand it back over to Henry.
All right. Thank you so much, Ellen. And that was really great. And the feedback in the chat confirms that. So, a virtual round of applause for Ellen from everybody. And then we'll go into a quick preview of coming attractions. So, let me turn on screen share here so we can look at the website. Thank you so much, Ellen. So here we go. Coming attractions. Tomorrow morning, first thing, we have the Cyberinfrastructure Landscape presented by Mike Renfro of Tennessee Tech. And this is essentially a merging of two talks that we have done in the past. One focused on systems and centers that are providing resources nationally, the other focused on organizations, national and international organizations for research computing. And these are now merged together into a single session. We'll follow that with how to do an intake interview, including some demonstrations to be presented by Dana Strong and Kathy Chang. This is something that we've been doing since the very beginning since 2015 when we had our very first workshop. In fact, we invented it on the fly during that workshop. Um, and as of a couple of years ago, through the recommendation of one of the members of the community, one of the facilitators, we decided to add a session on how to do intake interviews. And then on Wednesday, we'll actually do a practicum where we will practice intake interviews. And those of you who are interested in earning a badge in intake interviews, that'll be your opportunity to earn the intake interview badge. And you don't have to do anything special to earn the badge, just show up and then do a good job with the intake interviews. And if you don't get it this year, we'll keep doing it in the future. And there's no charge for that. Then in the afternoon, we've got a panel on how to learn and how to teach research computing resources, moderated by Jose Hernandez from Florida State. And then in the latter part of the afternoon, we have a panel on research data management, and that's going to have a mix of research data librarians and CI facilitators, moderated by Ann James of George Washington University. So we're looking forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. So have a lovely dinner, get some good rest, and we'll see you tomorrow bright and early, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go. Thank you, everybody, and I'll shut off the recording, and that'll be our evening. So have a great evening. See you tomorrow morning, first thing.